So, namaskar and welcome once again, friends, for the next lecture. As proposed, I am going to talk about The Mimic Man by V.S. Naipaul. As the name itself suggests, this is about the colonial subject and their attempt at mimicking or imitating their colonial masters. And this is again a natural offshoot of colonial rule. So, we find that this is yet another very important novel by V.S. Naipaul. It was published in 1967 and it employs a confessional narrative method with a fragmented and non linear structure following the memoirs of Ranjit Ralph Singh, a 40-year-old Indo Caribbean politician exiled in London. So, in fact, this is a reflective narrative which combines the memory and desire of the 40-year-old Indo Caribbean whose actual name is Ranjit but has assumed another hybrid identity by naming himself Ralph. So, Ranjit Ralph Singh uh, is in self exile in London and is trying to recollect his life based on his memory and desire, and curiously mixes the incidents of his life. So this narrative oscillates between his childhood on the fictional Caribbean island which is named Isabella, his student years in London, his political career again in Isabella, and his disillusioned present in a suburban boarding house in London. So, this novel has three parts. Uh, One is centered on Singh's disgraced exile. He is living in exile when the novel opens, and then off and off he goes back and forth in his life, talking about his childhood, then his divorced and unhappy life, and his collaboration with Brown, another childhood friend interested in politics. So, The Mimic Men can be considered an autobiographical Bildungsroman because it narrates the life of a young man who creates a self as the culmination of his psychological, intellectual, and moral development. So, it gives him the chance to make a journey to his past, construct an order in his life, and create a history, memory, and character for himself. And this accounts for the reflective, philosophical nature of the text. The style, as usual, of these kind of narratives is fragmented because the memory does not have any linear form, and that's why the style of writing in this novel is fragmented with a circular notion of history and the motive to establish a difference with the imperial standards. This way, using textual strategies of subversion and is characteristic of almost all post colonial writers, is what is observed by Lu in his critique of the novel. So, we find that the novel is centered in a place called Isabella. So, born in the 1920s on Isabella, which is a British colony, and critics have tried to identify it, and many of them believe that it could be Trinidad, the home of V.S. Naipaul himself. Um, so, born in 1920s on Isabella Island, Ralph Singh or Ranjit Ralph Singh grew up in a privileged Indian family, as his father was a school teacher who later turned a spiritual leader and abandoned his career to live among the poor, while his mother's family owned the island's Coca Cola bottling plant. So, obviously, he came from an elite stock, to say, by the colonial standards. His uncle Cecil, a wealthy and arrogant figure, later murders Singh's father during a familiar power struggle. And as a student in London, Singh adopts the anglicized name Ralph and marries Sandra, a working class British woman who fails to complete her studies. Uh, their marriage, marked by cultural dislocation and mutual dissatisfaction, leads them to return to Isabella after Singh inherits land and wealth. So, when we look at Ralph, he's a politician and former cabinet minister from the fictional Caribbean island of Isabella, and the novel is framed as his memoir written while he is in self imposed exile in London. He is deeply self conscious, alienated, and obsessed with how he appears to others, and he constantly reflects on his failures in politics, in marriage, and in finding a stable identity, and thus turns out to be uh, a typical diasporic figure, never at ease or never at comfort with himself or others. He feels caught between two worlds, the colonial past and the uncertain post colonial future, as he tries to mimic European ways but never truly belongs anywhere. And we find that all his attempts at sending down the roots or belonging fail. We find that Singh comes back to Isabella with his wife Sandra, and using his inherited land and property, he builds Kripalville, a posh suburb. Both Singh and Sandra sense the selflessness of Isabellan society and experience a feeling of having been flung off the world, a typical, diasporic sensibility. Although Singh has been born and brought up in this island, but still now that his sensibility has been altered living in England and marrying an English woman, when he comes back to his same island nation, Isabella, he finds it somehow out of place, remote, and unhappening. So, back on Isabella, he collaborates with Brown, a socialist activist and childhood friend, to establish a political movement. They leverage Brown's newspaper, The Socialist, to gain public support, and Singh eventually becomes a minister in the post colonial government. However, his attempts to secure international recognition for Isabella's sovereignty fail, and internal corruption erodes his influence. So, ousted from power and estranged from Sandra, as I said, the relationship between Ralph Singh and Sandra also turns sour, because they both belong to two different worlds, and it's so difficult to reconcile the gap between their cultures, and as a result, they never agree at a point, and ultimately this leads to their break in relationship. So Ralph Singh or Ranjit Singh, in an attempt to become a replica of his colonial masters, ends up bitterly being devoid of both his native identity and his European imitation, in that he is ousted from power in his own island, and is also estranged from Sandra, and as a result, as a last resort, believing that going back to London will probably answer all his existential questions, he goes to London in self exile and is brooding over his life, and as a result, this particular novel is born. He grapples with the shipwreck of his ambitions, reflecting on the mimicry of European structures in post-colonial societies and his own rootlessness as a diasporic Indian. And in that, he comes very close to his creator V.S. Naipaul, who had more or less undertaken a similar journey, had gone to England for his studies, and ever since he kept on dividing his time between his homeland and England, and then always making comparisons and finding no solace in either of the places. The same kind of rootlessness governed his life throughout. So the mimic man departs from this tradition and represents a serious critical investigation of a colonial society in transition, a direction which he has followed in many subsequent works, both fiction and non-fiction, as EBSCO comments on uh, V.S. Naipaul's approach in this particular novel. uh, if we talk about this novel, the first theme that comes to our notice is colonial mimicry. Uh, Nasrullah Mambrol opines, and I quote, when colonial discourse encourages the colonized subject to mimic the colonizer by adopting the colonizer's cultural habits, assumptions, institutions, and values, the result is never a simple reproduction of those traits. Rather, the result is a blurred copy of the colonizer. And this is what we notice uh, in the life of Ralph Singh, who tries to imitate his colonial masters, believing that he can become their exact replica and feel the places that have been left by them. But in doing so, he still remains a pale or shadowy copy of the colonizers, and never ever sounds authentic, authoritative, and real like the colonizers. Thus, the mimicry represented in the novel is not shown as a symbol of empowerment, rather, a deep form of self betrayal, masking insecurity, loss, and cultural emptiness, used as a survival strategy. And it is a kind of comment on the post colonial condition of those nations that were once colonies and got freedom. So they continued to emulate the lifestyle and the style of governance of their colonial masters, and there was a continuity of some sort stopping them from really understanding their real culture and real nature. And V.S. Naipaul is critical of this kind of a hollowness on the part of the newly independent countries and their rulers. So he refers to Ralph's character. Ralph's hollow speeches are designed to impress, becoming a metaphor for the post colonial psyche itself, haunted by the need to imitate the colonizer while never fully becoming them. And so, this is the post colonial condition that V.S. Naipaul tries to talk about. The post colonial subject talks big but is never really out of the shadow of the colonial rule, which has rendered it powerless. So it results in colonial mimicry, and this mimicry is meaningless and futile in the sense mimicry can never be original. So I quote from the text, we here on our island handling books printed in this world and using its goods had been abandoned and forgotten. We pretended to be real, to be learning, to be preparing ourselves for life. We mimic men of the new world, one unknown corner of it, with all its reminders of the corruption that came so quickly to the new. So, this line underscores the performative adoption of colonial systems where education and governance become acts of mimicry rather than empowerment. And these nations, they come to realize that in the name of civilizing them by extending them uh, English education and the English manners, they have been rendered ineffective. In the sense, despite his best efforts and intentions, they can still not really replace their colonial masters, and at the same time, have forgotten much of their own identity and culture. So, another theme that is predominant in this novel is exile, displacement, and rootlessness, which is uh, the key experience of a diasporic subject. Withdrawal, it became urgent now for me. Before, it had been part of fantasy, but part of the urge to escape shipwreck and to return to lands I had fashioned in my imagination. Now I felt the need only to get away to a place unknown among people whose lives and even language I need never enter. Ultimately, Ralph feels equally disappointed and deranged from both his native land and the land of adoption, that is England. Uh, what is and where is home for Ralph? Is it the place of birth? Is it the island on which he is relocated? Is it London, which he moves with the hope of finding home? Is he in exile? Why he is in exile? These are pertinent questions, relating to the life of Ralph. He travels back and forth between Isabella and London, uh, a constant quest for finding home, very much like the novelist himself, the ideal landscape, but he never finds it. And this again reiterates the view that there is a impossibility of finding a permanent home or permanence in the life of the diasporic subject, who are always on the run, always displaced, always rootless. Being aware that he cannot attain the home embedded in history, Ralph dwells in a fanciful home contrary to his real, shipwrecked, and lost situation. But again, this is also part of his larger imagination, not the reality. And in fact, he fails to find and fully realize that ideal home of his imagination, which is neither here nor there. Home suggests order, permanency, and familiarity that Ralph is unable to find either in Isabella or in England. Ironically enough, he tries to construct home in a totally alien land, which he associates with order only due to the books he has read, that is England. But again, there also, at what cost? He is completely alienated, completely alone, and reflecting on his life. So that means he does not really belong to that place either. So, as opposed to his chieftainship in his iron land, Ralph can solely become in the West an outsider and adrift, a rootless mimic man lacking substantial identity. Friends, even if we dress like the British and try to copy their accent, still we will not be treated as one of them, because we can be singled out based on our race and color and can be treated as other. So Ralph Singh's attempts at becoming an Englishman by copying their manners, by uh, wearing English clothes, by marrying an English woman, they all fall flat, as despite all his efforts, does not become an English gentleman. Um, Again, let's quote from the novel: "The houses by which I was surrounded, the red brick houses, became interchangeable with those in our tropical street of corrugated iron and fretted white gables, which I had uh, also once hoped never to see again. Certain emotions bridge the years and link unlikely places. Sometimes, by this linking, the sense of place is destroyed, and we are ourselves alone, the young man, the boy, the child." So, the place that he is fleeing from ultimately haunts him, in that even in England he finds similar structures and feels the same kind of aloofness and otherness, which links him back to his own country, and ultimately makes him feel disappointed at all his efforts to distance himself from one place to another in search of roots, in search of better belonging, ends that way. So, two totally different places, the colonized and the colonizers' land, become identically alien and stultifying. Yet, what is worse, unbeknownst to him, Ralph is colonized by his psyche within himself. So long as he is captured in the prison of his psyche, the nameless pain from which one feels there can be no way out, he cannot achieve a sense of belonging either in Isabella or in London. So we find that, like his creator, he is suffering an existential nomadism, and whatever attempts he has been making by changing geographical locales, by changing his habits, by trying to mimic the ways of his European masters, he still makes himself completely alien in both the worlds, as he is too cut off from his native place and traditions to call it his own, and his sensibility has been altered so much so that he looks at it with the borrowed glasses of England. But in England itself, despite best of his efforts, he cannot assimilate with the natives and can never be accepted as one out of them. So, this sense of exile is something that is perpetual. Another theme that is paramount is the colonization of the mind. I abolished all landscapes to which I could not attach myself, and longed only for those I had known. I thought of escape, and it was escape to what I had so wished, to go back as whole as I had come. So, Singh's attempt to abolish foreign constructs reflects the struggle to reclaim agency, but then ultimately it results in failure. My first memory of school is of taking an apple to the teacher. This puzzles me. We had no apples on Isabella. It must have been an orange, yet my memory insists on the apple. So, this kind of distorted memory symbolizes cultural dislocation of colonial subjects forced to adopt foreign symbols. So, if we look at our own earliest writers in English, they were talking about subjects that were foreign to the sensibility of Indians, like beautiful summers and so on and so forth. Obviously, they were looking at our own world with the borrowed idioms from the world of colonizers. So, Ralph is trying to, distance himself from his own life, from his own familiar world, just to find it surprising that his sensibility is neither completely foreign nor completely home. It is something which is confused, it is something which is otherwise undesirable. So, Ralph's memoir writing becomes an act of decolonization, or let's say unloading his mind, allowing him to confront his complicity in colonial structures. By dissecting his political failures and cultural dislocation, he begins dismantling the epistemological prison of colonial thought. We began in bluff, we continued in bluff, we began in innocence, believing in the virtue of this smell of sweat, we continued with knowledge of poverty and power. So Ralph's journey involves rejecting the colonial myth of European superiority and the post colonial illusion of self governance. His exile in London exposes the metropolis's alienation, challenging the idea of the imperial center as a refuse. Ralph grapples with Isabella's erased history of slavery and indentured labor, recognizing that decolonization requires reckoning with systemic violence. His father's assassination by Uncle Cecil symbolizes the self destructive legacy of colonial internalization, as Jayachandran remarks. Singh longs for a sense of control over his life, and therefore he turns to writing, which becomes a means of releasing from the barren cycles of events. It is through the expression and presentation of the events that he can reduce the pain of being a displaced colonial man. The act of writing his memoirs provides him the final solution to his sense of dislocation, for through writing he is at last able to take control of the fragments of his past and shape them into a spiritual and psychological autobiography. Again, as Jayachandran, remarks. So, you know, we find that it's a very powerful post-colonial diasporic text, centering around cultural hybridity and fragmented identity, displacement and rootlessness, mimicry as a diasporic survival strategy, as we find that the diasporic subjects have to indulge in this kind of mimicry in order to survive in the host land. There are classes of cultural expectations, there is quest for authenticity and alienation. So in London I had no guide, there was no one to link my present with my past. It was up to me to choose my character. This typifies the diasporic struggle to reconcile multiple cultural frameworks without having a true referent. And this talks about the situation of Ralph Singh, and in turn also visualizes the situation of any diasporic subject for that matter. So if we look at this novel, we can say that Ralph Singh is a tragic figure, lost, imitative, unable to fully belong either in the Caribbean or in England, and he is painfully self aware of his failure to live a real life. So ultimately, we can say that the mimic man presents the diasporic experiences as one of alienation, identity confusion, and the painful awareness of never truly belonging. Ralph Singh's personal struggles, political failure, a broken marriage, and unfulfilled dreams mirror the larger struggles of a post colonial world where individuals and nations are forced to navigate complex relationships with colonial powers and the legacies they leave behind. So, friends, these are the references. Thank you very much. Kindly join me for the next class. We'll take up some more narratives of diaspora to look at this intricate world of diasporic lives seen through the different lenses of these diasporic writers. So, thank you very much.